Hello and welcome once again to all of my brilliant students. Welcome to Mr. Beck's class, where we're going to be talking about archetypes today. More and more archetypes, except this time we're going to be delving into archetypes in combination with plot. So today we're going to do an overview of Booker's 7 basic plots as a means of literature analysis and construction. Remember whenever I told you that archetypal criticism is a lens through which we can view the world, the lens that we can view the worlds of literature, right? Well, we're going to keep on moving forward in that sort of direction for now. So just remember that an archetype is something that represents a universal pattern in human nature, okay? The prefix arche is from the Greek, and it means all-encompassing or universal. So you can think of an archetype as a universal or a cultural symbol. Those things are not necessarily interchangeable. There's a little bit of nuance in there, but you know that those things are very closely connected now, that a universal or cultural symbol is very similar as an archetype, all right? And so let's go ahead and get into it a little bit more. Archetypes can include not just characters, but they can also include settings, they can include themes and symbols, but they can also include plots. So remember whenever I said that Carl Jung believed that archetypal characters, remember whenever we were talking about that, the hero and the innocent and the rebel and the leader or the ruler, right? He believed that all of those were part of a collective unconsciousness of humanity. Well, Booker developed this further. He wrote a book using archetypes to describe the universal stories found across numerous cultures. So these have been dubbed Booker's 7 basic plots, and for the most part, they fall into the following formula. First, you have the anticipation stage. This is the very beginning, this is the call to adventure, and this is the promise of what is to come. You can think of it somewhat as overlapping with the exposition, although it doesn't always overlap with the exposition. The next is the dream stage. The protagonist begins to experience some initial success, everything's to be going well, and then sometimes there is even like this dreamlike sense of invincibility where everything is hunky-dory, right? But then that is met with what is called the frustration stage. This is the first confrontation with an enemy or with the conflict or the obstacle, and things begin to go really, really bad, really, really wrong. And then that just begins to accelerate even further to what is known as the nightmare stage. And at this point, this is the maximum dramatic tension. This is whenever disaster has erupted and it seems that all hope is lost. The odds are stacked against your protagonist. They have to fight against all of the odds and still manage to overcome. And that is the nightmare stage. You can also think of that as the very top peak of the Freytag pyramid. This is whenever we've moved into the climax. Then finally, we have the resolution. And that is whenever the protagonist is eventually victorious, or in the case of tragedy, dead, and they might be united with their other half, a romantic partner. They might end up getting the treasure or the region or the land, or they've accomplished their goal, or whatever it might be. But all of the conflict has been basically wrapped up at that point, okay? Now, your assignment, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you about your assignment first, is that you will be writing a story. I know that my original prompt said that it can be like a video game story. I've decided that it doesn't have to be a video game story. You don't have to take it as if you were writing out a video game role-playing game, or as if you were taking it from the viewpoint of a character in a video game. Just go ahead and just write a short story. And using your knowledge of Booker's 7 basic plots after this presentation, select one of the plots from the above, okay? So you're going to pick like rags to riches, or you'll pick the rebirth, or you'll pick tragedy or comedy, right? You're going to write a 2 to 4 page story. Now, if you're writing out by hand, one page is a page front and back, okay? If you're typing it out, one page is one page typed, right? So just make sure that you have a story that progresses the plot of your video game or your short story along. So this can be anything. This can be a character moving towards the tragic doom. This can be a character getting in a comedically tangled web of confusion. It can be so much more. And you'll be using a table that is similar to this. So as you're kind of going through this, as you're learning about this, be kind of taking note. Okay, do I want my story to be a quest? Do I want it to be a voyage and return? What is the nature of these things that I want it to be, okay? And as you go through, each section is going to have an anticipation stage, dream stage, frustration, nightmare, and resolution, just like we just reviewed, okay? Now, sometimes they are called different things that adapt or fit into that particular plot. Okay, so I think like the anticipation stage for overcoming the monster is the call, whenever the hero is like called up to rise to their destiny and so on and so forth, right? And so you can remember that. Go ahead and put that in your head so that if you write that story, if you use that plot, you can write in what you're going to have happen there in the anticipation stage, okay? I want you to be filling that out, and that is going to be your helpful little guide for writing your story whenever you actually get down to the writing, okay? So, let's go ahead and begin. The first plot that I want to cover is overcoming the monster. And this is whenever a monster makes its presence known, but it is far and distant. There is this overarching threat, okay, that the world is under, and the monster is typically base, it's typically vile, it's oftentimes accenting the darker side of humanity, okay? Examples that we can think of is Perseus, Theseus, Beowulf is a really good example, Dracula is a good one, Seven Samurai, James Bond. I use Star Wars in my example on your notes because whenever it comes to Star Wars, like the darker side of the humanity is encompassed in Darth Vader, the dark side of the Force. And at first, Vader is this far distant, far removed sort of threat over Luke Skywalker, and he begins to eventually come closer and closer and closer and closer until there is a final confrontation, right? So that's what overcoming the monster is like there's this dun 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 dun, and it's this tension of the threat or the monster approaching, of getting closer, of the noose tightening, if you will, of the trap being sprung on our protagonist. So, here are all of the stages. The first stage is called the call, and typically this is whenever the protagonist is called to a higher purpose, saying, hey, you need to get out there, you need to fulfill your destiny, you need to fulfill what fate has in store for you, what it has designed for you. Beowulf, you need to sail across the sea and go help one of your, your father's distant relatives or distant friends. Luke, you need to go and you need to join the rebellion. And oftentimes in this stage, the protagonist doesn't want to go. Okay? Sometimes the protagonist doesn't want to go, and so there has to be some sort of trauma that hits, and then all of a sudden they are called to their higher purpose through whatever tragedy they have to go through. All right? Then, after they go from the point of the call, there is the original dream stage, okay? This is their initial success. The protagonist begins to prepare themselves for the upcoming battle, but the danger seems far away, the danger seems remote, things seem to be going well, Luke Skywalker is beginning to train in the ways of the Force, and everything seems to be going fine. He gets off of Tatooine, he's with this smuggler, he's learning the ways of the Force from Obi-Wan, there's initial success, right? Things are going great. Then that gets frustrated. As soon as you get that initial success, typically what will happen is that our protagonist will oftentimes get a little cocky. They'll oftentimes get a little too big for their britches. All of a sudden, they are super confident and they think that they're ready for that initial confrontation, and that's when the monster shows up. The big bad shows up. Okay, Grendel comes and kills several of Beowulf's men. Or Vader shows up and he kills Obi-Wan Kenobi. Oops, spoilers. But there's no way that the hero can win, and they essentially get, at this point, the trash kicked out of them. Okay? Like, Vader ends up basically, like, capturing everyone. Like, they end up freeing the princess, yes, but like Han Solo ends up like they end up in this garbage pit, like being harassed by like this creature that's inside of this garbage pit, and Darth Vader like stops Obi-Wan Kenobi from going with them, and eventually ends up killing the mentor of Luke Skywalker. And so like that original confrontation, the good guys do not get the upper hand in all of that, and that's all in preparation for this nightmare stage, for the final ordeal. The monster is now no longer just this distant threat. Not only is it aware of the protagonists, it is hunting them. It is coming after them. There is something that is on the clock, and the protagonist has to get away somehow, or they have to turn around and face this monster, right? And that, in Star Wars, is culminated whenever Luke Skywalker hops into an X-Wing and has to go blow up the Death Star, right? Well, who shows up? The monster, Darth Vader, okay? So you have this climactic battle, everything stacked, everything seems stacked against the protagonist. The odds are not in their favor, right? And the monster has borne down on them, sprung the trap. Everything is going bad, and it's all up to the hero. It's all on the hero's shoulders to basically destroy the Death Star and end up flying away after using the Force in the case of Luke Skywalker, right? And that's typically what happens. Either the monster ends up dying or there is a miraculous escape from the protagonist. So the monster's power is broken, the Death Star is destroyed, and those under its influence are suddenly liberated. The protagonist emerges victorious, and they often receive a treasure, a kingdom, or they get their romantic interest. Okay, so there's lots of celebration, just like at the end of Star Wars. There's lots of kissing, there's lots of treasure and awards and all of these kind of things because the monster's power has been broken. In the case of Beowulf, he becomes king, right? And so that's the basics of how overcoming the monster works. The next is rags to riches. This is a favorite, especially here in the West, especially here in the United States. We love the story of the rags to riches. We love the story whenever the protagonist is at the very bottom. They are at the very bottom, whether it's like the social hierarchy, so it's like they're not popular in high school, or they're getting the trash kicked out of them in the streets, like they have no wealth, they're poor, they're the youngest child, and they're kept in low status by some oppressor, whether that be a character or society, right? Cinderella is an example of that. Cinderella was kept oppressively low because of her stepmother and stepsisters, right? So, by luck or by skill, they escape and find their success. They find that all of a sudden they find that all of a sudden they're popular, or all of a sudden they've moved up in life, or all of a sudden they're rich, or whatever it might be. And so that success is oftentimes short-lived, as a sharp crisis forces them to draw on their inner selves, and then the final battle, that final nightmare stage, is basically them having to prove that they're worthy of the status, of the riches, of the things that they've gained. So, examples in this, I used Aladdin on your notes, Cinderella, Jane Eyre, Great Expectations, The Prince and the Pauper, many, many others. Again, this is a super, super popular one here in the United States. We love the idea of the person, the underdog. We love the underdog, and Rags to Riches is the epic underdog story, okay? So, you start off, and the hero is in a really bad way. This is their initial wretchedness. So they are living their worst life, not their best, and they are called up and out of their circumstances by something. In the case of Aladdin, he's running around Agrabah, he's stealing bread, singing things like Riff Raff, Street Rat, I don't buy that. If only they'd look closer, would they see a poor boy? Anyways, so would they see a poor boy? Because as it is right now, you're just a poor boy, right? The prince even makes fun of him for having fleas. That's fun, okay? Like, it's not a great life. He's not doing his best, okay? Well, all of a sudden, boom, he's called out of his circumstances because he finds a magic lamp. And then we enter the dream stage. He goes off into the world, and he finds out he does really well. He's really good at being Prince Ali. He comes parading into Agrabah like on top of Apu, his elephant now, and he's got 75 golden camels and bakers and candlestick makers and parrots who sing to him, and it's just a Disney spectacle, right? And so he goes in, he meets the princess, and they go into a whole new world, right? Like, they go off, and he's finding out that things are doing all right, okay? The first frustration that Aladdin comes into is the central crisis between him and Jafar. So something or someone confronts the hero, and they demand that they draw on their newfound independence, their newfound growth. Oftentimes, this is a person from their past, right? That is true in the case of Jafar, because he knew Aladdin as the street rat, right? And so whenever Aladdin gets thrown off of the cliff and he goes down into the water and he's drowning, that is the central crisis, because that is like whenever things come to a head between Jafar and Aladdin, all right? Aladdin has a short victory here whenever he's like, you've been controlling the Sultan with your snake staff, kapow! And all of a sudden, Jafar has to retreat. But it's not long after that we go into the fourth stage, the nightmare stage. And that is whenever Jafar goes and he manages to steal the lamp from Aladdin using Iago the parrot, okay? And so that's whenever Jafar becomes the most powerful sorcerer in the world, the Sultan of Agrabah. He is the one who's on top now, and Aladdin has been blasted off into like the most remote part of the world inside of a tower, and there he's going to freeze to death and die if he doesn't think of anything, right? So now Aladdin has to go, hop on the magic carpet, get back to Agrabah, face off against Jafar as a gigantic snake, and eventually trick him into becoming a genie himself, and therefore proving Aladdin himself to be brave, courageous, noble, and worthy of everything that he had. That's the final resolution. So there is this final union, completion, or this final fulfillment. This is the fifth one. And the hero proves their inner worth and is able to move on to a higher stage in life than before. In this case, he becomes a real prince. So they receive wealth, money, their romantic interest, hello Princess Jasmine, etc. And generally they live happily ever after. Welcome to America, Fievel Goes West, so on and so forth, right? Yeah, so that's rags to riches. The next one is the quest, and this is whenever the protagonist and the companions set out to acquire an important object or get to a particular location. So they have to face all these temptations and obstacles along the way. Things that includes is the Odyssey, whenever Odysseus is trying to get back home to his home in Ithaca. The Pilgrim's Progress, Lord of the Rings. I think the example that I use is the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay, so it's more about a destination. You're trying to get to the place and then get back, or you're trying to get to the place and settle down, or you're trying to get an object to a place, or you're trying to retrieve an object. The Maltese Falcon is another one of these. I love Raiders of the Lost Ark for this one because it's basically this ancient treasure that Indiana Jones has to go and he has to find, right? So the first stage, the anticipation stage, is that you are in what is called the oppressed city of destruction. So average life in the city has become oppressive, it's become intolerable, and the hero must make a long and difficult journey to acquire an item or get to a new location. All right. Maybe Fievel, maybe an American Tale with Fievel, maybe it would fall into the quest because the whole point of the mice like leaving is because they are in the city of destruction, right? In this case, in Indiana Jones, the city of destruction is what would happen if the Nazis got a hold of the Lost Ark of the Covenant. Okay, then they would win the war. They would win World War II. Everything would be plunged into darkness, right? So Indiana Jones, he decides to go off and he's going to go looking for the Ark of the Covenant. That's whenever you go into the dream stage and whenever you go into the journey and the initial ordeals. So the journey is across these perilous lands. It's strewn with opposition. They have to fight their way through monsters, temptations, deadly opposites, and then there's even oftentimes a journey into the underworld. In the case of Indiana Jones, it's whenever Indiana has to go down into the underworld of the snakes, okay? So the next stage in this is the arrival and the frustration. So the hero arrives, or at least partially completes their quest. They either almost get to the object that they were trying to get. So like maybe Indiana Jones, in the case of him, he finds the lost Ark, but just at the last second, it's snatched away from him by Donovan and the Nazis. The frustration ensues as the quest is not yet complete and things actually get more difficult. So now, not only do the Nazis have the Ark of the Covenant, but Indiana Jones and all of his friends have been captured, right? That's what brings you to the nightmare stage, or the final ordeals. The final ordeals escalate in trials and in series. Things become harder and harder until finally the heroes must draw on all of their inner reserves, all of their inner strength, find that faith, band together, do whatever they have to in order to achieve their goal, right? Peter Quill and the other Guardians of the Galaxy have to finally learn how to work as a team so that they can recover one of the Infinity Stones, and so on and so forth, right? That's the final ordeal. Again, it's similar in the sense of overcoming the monster, to where it's culminating in this final climactic battle, and the hero has the odds stacked against them and has everything riding on their shoulders, right? But, however, in the quest, the goal is eventually achieved, and their goal, whether it's a destination or an object, is finally reached and the quest is completed. The City of Destruction, that place that was so unbearable at the very beginning, is suddenly renewed. There's this new life, and life returns to a better state. And that's the quest. The voyage and return is whenever the protagonist goes to a strange and distant land, and after overcoming the threats and trials, they return home with these new experiences and appreciation. While the quest has a goal and a purpose, the voyage and return is more concerned with the journey itself. All right, so examples include Alice in Wonderland, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, The Time Machine, The Hobbit, The Rhine of the Ancient Mariner. We talk about Finding Nemo a lot. Gone with the Wind, if you want a more Civil War sort of like experience in your literature or movies. But Voyage and Return is different from The Quest because it's about the going. It's about the journey itself. It's not about going and getting something, right? It's not about getting to a particular place. It's about finding yourself or finding someone in the journey, okay? And so whenever it comes to Voyage and Return, there is this fall into another world, okay? Marlin has to go and he has to explore the rest of the big scary ocean, right, in order to go find his son, okay? In the case of Alice in Wonderland, Alice literally falls down a rabbit hole into another world. Neo in The Matrix falls out of the Matrix and into another world, whether that's literally or figuratively, it just depends. In the case of many times, like the examples I just gave are mostly literal, right? Like Alice literally falls, Neo literally falls into this other world. And so they suddenly find themselves in this place that is very different, it's very new, it's very unfamiliar. However, the initial fascination is overwhelmed, or the initial fascination overwhelms their fear. Okay, their curiosity gets the best of them. Their curiosity is kicked into high gear. They're more fascinated than they are scared, and so the new world appears strange, but it's also beautiful to them. Right? There might be new laws, new codes to how this world operates, and things appear just like I said. They appear beautiful, although they are strange. Now, the frustration arises whenever the strangeness begins to turn ugly. Okay, and the protagonist becomes more and more aware that they are not home. Okay, and the original fascination is wiped away by fear, discouragement, and danger. All right, Alice originally is fascinated by the new world that she's in until she ends up at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Okay, whenever things begin to get absolutely completely ridiculous, and all of a sudden she's becoming more afraid, she becomes more lost, and she becomes more discouraged that she's not going to be able to find her way home. In the nightmare stage, the danger comes closer and things take a turn for the downright alien. All right, so in the Matrix, that's whenever the robots are basically like zeroing in on their little ship's location, right? You have like these weird tentacled robots that are floating around and they're trying to kill Neo and his crew, or Morpheus and his crew. In Alice in Wonderland, she goes to the court of the Queen of Hearts, and there she's presented with ordeals and trials, and this is oftentimes at a disadvantage because they don't know how the world operates. In the actual book of Alice in Wonderland, there's actually an entire judgment scene. There's an entire courtroom scene where the laws are absolutely ridiculous, and because Alice doesn't know what the laws of this strange new world are, she's the one who ends up found guilty. She's the one who ends up nearly having her head decapitated because she doesn't know how the world works, right? Nevertheless, there is always a thrilling escape and return, and the protagonist eventually succeeds in their ordeals, or they manage to escape them altogether. They return to the familiar with experience, knowledge, and appreciation of their journey home. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to end it right there. I don't want my video to go too long, so go ahead and if you're ready, move on to my next video, which is going to be Booker 7 Basic Plots Part 2, and I'll give you the last 3. That's going to include comedy, tragedy, and rebirth, and I'll even like go over your assignment again, all right? But for right now, good luck, don't stop learning, and have a wonderful day, my brilliant students.